Welcome back to a special Project Black Garden. I'm your host, Michael. For years, we've explored the pages of my great Uncle Sam's journals. Accounts of creatures that shouldn't exist, encounters that defy explanation, and secrets buried deep beneath the layers of official denial. But tonight, during this episode, we're turning our attention away from the files in our archive and towards something equally unsettling. Your stories. Over the past year, listeners from around the world have sent us emails, letters, voice recordings even, and first-hand accounts of things they can't explain. Strange figures standing at the edge of forests, unmarked lights hovering over remote highways, missing time, impossible creatures, encounters that have haunted families for generations. Now, some of these stories may have simple explanations, but others, I'm not so sure. So tonight, I'm going to open the mailbag and examine some of the most chilling reports ever sent to Project Black Garden. As always, we'll let you decide what is real, what is misunderstood, and what may still be hiding in the shadows. So lock your doors, dim the lights, and keep your eyes on the darkness just beyond the edge of your screen. Because somewhere out there, something may be watching. And if my great Uncle Sam was right, the truth is far stranger than any monster. Now let's get to these emails. Email number 1. Subject: I saw something watching us. Hey Michael, I've been listening to Project Black Garden for about a year now, and after hearing your episode on shadow entities, I finally decided to share something that bothered me for nearly 20 years. I grew up on a farm in rural Nebraska. When I was 14, my cousin and I used to sneak out at night and ride our bikes down the dirt roads surrounding the cornfields. One summer night, around midnight, we stopped near a field because we heard what sounded like someone walking through the corn. At first, we thought it was maybe just a stray deer, but then we saw it. About 50 yards into the field stood what looked like a man. He was unusually tall, at least 7 feet, if I had to guess. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there among the stalks. We could see his outline because of the moonlight. My cousin yelled, asking if someone was out there, but the figure never responded. Then every sound around us stopped. No insects, no wind, nothing. The figure slowly raised one arm toward us, and that's when we got on our bikes and took off. When we looked back, the figure was standing at the edge of the field, much closer than before, but neither one of us saw it move. We're both in our 30s now, and neither of us can explain what happened that night, but I still avoid driving that road after dark. Thanks for sharing everyone else's stories. I can't wait to hear the next episode. Jake. Well, Jake, thank you for sharing. That definitely recalls a handful of files that I've personally gone through. It definitely fits the shadow entity myths and experiences. But from what you described, it could have been an encounter with Slender Man. Anyways, keep me and the listeners updated, and I'd love to hear a follow-up. Email number 2. Subject: something called my name. Hey Michael, I never thought I'd write this email, but your recent ghost episodes reminded me of something that happened in my childhood home. When I was 10 years old, my family lived in a 2-story house outside Pittsburgh. The house had an unfinished basement that always made me uncomfortable. Nothing dramatic, just a feeling that I wasn't alone whenever I went downstairs. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty and went downstairs to get a glass of water. As I walked past the basement door, I heard my mother's voice. She quietly said my name, not shouted, not whispered it. She just spoke normally. Emily. I assumed she was awake, so I opened the basement door, but the light was off and no one was there. Then I heard the same voice again from the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. Emily. I slammed the door and ran upstairs. It terrified me. The strangest part is my parents were asleep. I checked immediately. My mother was in bed and had never left her room. For years afterward, everyone in my family occasionally heard voices calling their names when nobody was around. My father heard it twice, and my older brother, he even heard it once. We moved away when I was 16, and none of us ever experienced it again. I spent years trying to explain it logically, but I still can't. Anyways, I love the show. Emily. Thank you, Emily, for reaching out. That is definitely a creepy story. It's the one thing I wish we had more of in these files were ghosts and entity about the unknown and the paranormal and ghostly encounters. Now, I know there are more in these files because there's so many of them. It's hard to get through all of them. But ghost stories are always my favorite. Hopefully, we'll have more soon. Now, our third listener email wasn't an email. It was a direct message on one of the social accounts. Message 3. Subject: I don't think it was a bear. Michael, I'm a retired firefighter from Oregon, and I've kept this story to myself because I know how ridiculous it sounds. About 8 years ago, I was camping alone near a river in the Cascade Mountains. Around 3 a.m., I woke up because something was walking around my campsite. There was heavy footsteps, not animal sounds, but actual footsteps. I looked out through the tent mesh and saw a large, dark figure standing near my truck. At first, I assumed it was a bear. Then it stood up. The problem is, it was already standing. Whatever it was rose even higher. Its head nearly reached the roof of my pickup. I'm 6'2" and my truck is tall. This thing had to be 8 or 9 feet high. I couldn't make out details, only a silhouette. It walked toward the river using 2 legs the entire time, with no stumbling, no dropping to all fours, just walking. A few moments later, I heard a loud splash, and then silence. The next morning, I found enormous footprints in the muddy riverbank. I took pictures, but when I showed friends, everyone said they were probably distorted bear tracks. Maybe they're right, but I've spent decades outdoors. I've seen hundreds of bears. Whatever visited my campsite that night wasn't behaving like any bear I've ever encountered. Anyways, keep up the great work, and thanks for giving people a place to share experiences that don't fit neatly into the normal world. Fellow gardener, Mark. Well, Mark, as you're aware of being a listener, you know our favorite cryptid stories are those of Sasquatch and Bigfoot, the Yeti. And I think you know what you saw that night. And it doesn't make sense. And if I hadn't had my great uncle's files in front of me with pictures and images and detailed, thorough government files on the subject, I don't know what I would have thought if I was in your situation as well. I hope to hear from you again. I would love to know any more details, if any, about your sighting. Thanks for listening. Email number 4. Subject: she was gone when we turned around. Hi, Michael. I've listened to Project Black Garden since the beginning, and I finally worked up the courage to send this story. Back in 2017, my husband and I were driving through northern Arizona after visiting family. It was close to midnight, and we were on a long stretch of highway with absolutely nothing around us. And that's when we saw a woman standing on the shoulder of the road. She was wearing what looked like a white dress and wasn't moving. We slowed down because we thought she might need help. But as we approached, she turned her head and looked directly at us. Something about her face seemed wrong. Not deformed exactly, just off. My husband immediately said, "Don't stop." The moment we passed her, I looked back through the rear window. She wasn't there. There were no side roads, no buildings, no place for anyone to hide. Just empty desert illuminated by our brake lights. To this day, my husband refuses to discuss it. Whenever I bring it up, he changes the subject. Maybe there was a logical explanation, but I've never found one. Until the next episode, Rachel. That was a creepy one, Rachel. And you and your husband both know what you saw, whether he wants to admit it or not. Great story. I hope to hear from you again. Email number 5. Subject: my parents still don't believe me. Hi, I'm 16 years old and I've never told the story publicly before. When I was 13, my family lived near a wooded area outside Knoxville, Tennessee. One night, I woke up around 1 a.m. because I heard tapping on my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was a tree branch, so I didn't give it any more thought than that. But then the tapping continued. 3 taps, then a pause. 3 taps, another pause. Over and over. Now for context, my room is on the 2nd floor, and there was no tree close enough to reach the window. So I slowly pulled back my curtain and looked outside. Something was standing at the edge of the woods. It was tall and extremely thin. I could only see its outline because the moon was behind it. What scared me most was that it seemed to be looking directly at me. I don't know how long I stared at it, maybe 10 seconds. Then it tilted its head. The movement felt unnatural, almost like a bird studying something. I screamed and ran to my parents' room. When my dad checked outside, nothing was there. The next morning, he found several strange impressions in the grass beneath my window, but he insisted they were animal tracks. I still, to this day, sleep with my curtains closed. Love the podcast, Hannah. Well, Hannah, that was a scary situation. I would love to see if you had any more detail on the event and what you witnessed, because that creature falls under a handful of different mythical beasts or entities we've discussed on the show. Any updates would be great. Email number 6. Subject: I think I saw a gray. Hey Michael, I've gone back and forth on sending this for months. In the summer of 2020, I was driving home through rural Kansas after visiting a friend. Around 11 p.m., I noticed an unusually bright light hovering above a field near an old grain silo. At first, I assumed it was a drone. As I slowed down, the light suddenly shot upward and vanished. That's when I saw something standing near the road, It was only illuminated by my headlights for a few seconds. The figure appeared about 4 feet tall, with a thin body, long arms, and a large bald head. Its skin looked pale gray. But what I remembered most were the eyes. They seemed impossibly large and completely black. The figure, it didn't run. It didn't even react. It simply stared at me. I slammed on the gas and drove away as fast as I could. When I finally got home, I realized nearly 2 hours had passed since I left my friend's house, even though the drive normally takes less than 15 minutes. Now, I've never claimed to know what I saw, but it wasn't an animal, and it definitely wasn't a person. I know they're out there. Love the show, and keep up the great work. Can't wait for the next episode. Brandon. Well, Brandon, as you know, this gives off the classic gray alien and missing time stories that we've heard a million times. I'm glad you're safe, but there are a few files where encounters with especially certain grays have led to people who have been nothing more than being watched. Now, the watching tends to last more than just the one event. For some, it lasts for years. No interactions, nothing more, no abductions that they know of, just being watched. So I'd be interested if you've had any more encounters or anything else strange. If so, reach back out. I would love to hear it. Email number 7. Subject: I saw someone who wasn't there. Hello, Michael. My name is Karen. I'm a registered nurse, and while I've always considered myself a skeptic, one experience completely changed my perspective. A few years ago, I was working the overnight shift at a small hospital in West Virginia. At around 3:15 a.m., I was walking down a hallway that connected 2 patient wings. Near the far end of the corridor stood an elderly man wearing a hospital gown. This wasn't unusual, so I called out and asked if he needed help. He didn't answer. He simply stood there looking down toward the floor. I started making my way toward him, walking slowly at first. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. His gown wasn't moving. The air conditioning vents were strong enough to move everyone's clothing slightly, but his gown hung perfectly still. About 20 feet away, he slowly turned toward me. I immediately recognized him. Earlier that evening, I had helped transport his body to the morgue after he had passed away. That's when I froze. The figure took a single step forward, and the hallway lights flickered. For less than a second, I looked away, but when I looked back, the corridor was empty. I managed to find enough courage to check every room around, but nothing. I found nothing. The security cameras covering that hallway showed no one there at all. Now, I've worked in medicine for nearly 20 years. I've seen grief, stress, exhaustion, and trauma. But I have never experienced anything before or since that explains what happened that night. Thank you for sharing stories like these. Forever listener, Karen. Thank you for sharing that, Karen. Now, a majority of emails I receive from people have to deal with the paranormal, ghostly apparitions, and things and such. I really do believe most people have had an encounter with a ghost. And I think most people don't want to see what they see and find reasonable explanations to make sense of the events. Anyways, thanks again, Karen. I have a couple really good ghost stories to share in the upcoming season. Email number 8. Subject: something lived above us. Hi, Michael. I've been listening to Project Black Garden for over a year now, and one of your last episodes finally convinced me to share something that happened when I was a kid. My grandparents owned a summer home on a small lake in northern Minnesota. Every June, my family would spend a few weeks there fishing, swimming, and enjoying the woods. The cabin was old, built sometime in the 1940s, with creaky floors and a steep attic accessible through a pull-down ladder. From the time I was 8 years old, I hated that attic. Not because of spiders or dust, because I was convinced something lived up there. Every night, after everyone went to bed, I would hear movement overhead. Slow footsteps. Not the random scurrying of animals like squirrels. Actual footsteps. Heavy enough to make the ceiling beams creak. My parents always blamed raccoons. My grandfather blamed old wood settling. But I knew the difference. Whatever was up there moved with purpose. One summer night when I was 11, a thunderstorm rolled across the lake. The power went out around midnight, and I woke up to the sound of something dragging across the attic floor. It sounded heavy, like furniture being pulled from one side of the attic to the other. The noise continued for nearly 20 minutes. I finally worked up enough courage to wake my older brother. He heard it too. We sat frozen in bed listening. Then everything stopped. A few seconds later, we heard 3 slow knocks directly above us. Not from the roof, not from outside, from inside the attic. My brother and I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, we told our grandfather. To our surprise, he became very quiet. After a long pause, he admitted that he'd been hearing the same noises for years. That afternoon, he decided to investigate. My grandfather and my father, my brother and I stood in the hallway as he pulled down the attic ladder. The smell hit us immediately, a foul odor unlike anything I'd ever encountered, rotting earth mixed with stagnant water. My grandfather climbed up first. A few seconds later, he called for my father. The two of them spent nearly 10 minutes searching. When they came down, both looked pale. My father claimed they had found nothing. But later that night, I overheard them talking on the porch. According to my grandfather, something had been nesting in the far corner of the attic. The insulation had been flattened into a large circular depression. There were strange marks on the wooden beams, and scattered throughout the area were dozens of dead animals. All kinds like birds and squirrels, even some rabbits. None appeared eaten, they were just piled up there. The following year we returned to the cabin. The noises had stopped, and everything seemed normal again. Until my last night there. Around 2 a.m., I woke up for no reason. As I looked toward the hallway door, I noticed something standing outside my room. At first I thought it was my brother, but then it moved. The figure was hunched over, far too tall to be a person. Its head nearly touched the ceiling. I could make out long arms hanging out its sides, and for several seconds it stood completely still. Then it slowly tilted its head toward me, and I pulled my blanket over my face. When I finally looked again, it was gone. The next morning, my family packed up and left. A few years later, my grandparents sold the property. My grandfather never explained what he really found in the attic, and he passed away in 2018. But shortly before he died, he said something I've never forgotten. He told me, "Some houses aren't haunted by ghosts." I asked him what he meant. He looked toward the window and replied, "Sometimes something just decides to move in." Anyways, love the podcast. Thanks for sharing my story. Daniel. Okay, Daniel, that was a great email. Things that go bump in the night have always been one of my favorite things to read about and study. I'm curious if I could get the address of this old house. I would love to do some further research. Thanks again for listening. Email number 9. Subject: We weren't alone out there. Michael, I've listened to Project Black Garden for a long time, and after hearing some of your UFO episodes, I decided it was finally time to share an experience that happened to me and 2 friends nearly 15 years ago. In the summer of 2011, we rented a small fishing boat while vacationing alongside the coast of Maine. We weren't serious fishermen. Mostly we wanted to get away from the crowded beaches and spend an evening on the water. Drinks, laughs, silliness, you know how it is. Around sunset, we headed farther offshore than we probably should have. By 10 p.m., we could barely see the land. It was one of those perfectly calm nights where the ocean feels endless. No wind, no waves, just black water stretching to every horizon. And at first, everything was peaceful. Then my friend pointed toward the eastern sky. There was a light hovering low above the water. We assumed it was another boat. But as the minutes passed, it became obvious something wasn't right. The light never bobbed with the waves. It remained perfectly motionless, almost as if it were suspended in the air. We watched it for several minutes before deciding to move closer. As our boat approached, the light grew larger, so we could make out a dark shape around it. It was a massive shape, and it was circular, but it was completely silent. The object appeared to be hovering only a few hundred feet above the ocean surface. It had no lights, no engine noise, nothing. Just a bright white glow beneath a dark disc-shaped object. My friend grabbed binoculars, and the moment he looked through them, he lowered them and said something I'll never forget. "It's not touching the water." A chill ran through all of us. The object was enormous and far larger than any boat, yet it made absolutely no sound. Then something happened that none of us can explain. The ocean around our boat became completely still, not calm, still. The gentle swells vanished, the water looked like black glass. Even the sound of the engine seemed distant and muted, almost as if the entire world had suddenly been wrapped in a blanket. The object slowly began moving toward us. Not fast and not aggressively, just drifting silently across the water. My friend immediately started the engine, and we turned to leave. That's when the light beneath the craft brightened. The ocean below illuminated with an eerie blue glow. For a split second, I thought I saw shapes moving beneath the water. Large shapes, swimming directly beneath the object. And then suddenly, the craft accelerated. I've spent years trying to describe what happened next. The closest comparison would be watching a movie fast forward. One moment, it was a few hundred yards away. The next, it was gone. It didn't disappear. It didn't fade. It was just gone. It shot upward into the night sky faster than anything I've ever seen. Within seconds, it was as if it was another star in the sky. Then nothing. We sat there in silence and nobody spoke. Nobody tried explaining it away. The ride back to shore took nearly 3 hours. According to our phones, however, almost 5 hours had passed. To this day, none of us can account for the missing time. We still get together every summer, and every single year, someone eventually asks the same question. What do you think it was? The truth is, I don't know. But whatever we encountered that night wasn't a plane, wasn't a helicopter. It definitely wasn't a drone. And it definitely wasn't from the ocean. Thanks for reading. Your biggest fan, Chris. Well, Chris, I think that's the perfect email to end this episode on. Thank you for that fascinating and creepy story. Over the years, I've come to find the UFO and UAP phenomenon has only grown more crazy and more exciting. My great uncle's files have a certain section dedicated to just this. The sightings, the crafts, the beings who built those crafts. I hope to share more of these files soon, as they're always my more popular episodes. So keep an eye out. Keep listening. Keep watching the skies. And I hope to get another email from you soon. Anyways, that brings us to the end of tonight's listener mail episode. I love doing this special edition of Project Black Garden. I have a few more coming up as well. Keep an eye open for our first real special event episode entitled Alien Archives. Now, whether any of these email stories were encounters with spirits, creatures lurking beyond the edge of our understanding, tricks of the mind, or something else entirely, one thing remains certain. Most people experience things that cannot be explained. It just depends on who has the courage and strength to share them. Now, the stories we shared tonight came from different places, different backgrounds, and different walks of life. A teenager staring into the darkness beyond her bedroom window. A nurse encountering something impossible in a hospital corridor. Travelers on a lonely highway. Campers deep in the wilderness. Different people, different locations, yet the same feeling. The feeling that for just a moment they glimpse something hidden behind the curtain of ordinary reality. A peek into what we call the Black Garden. Maybe there are answers, and maybe there aren't. But as my great Uncle Sam often wrote in his journals, the world becomes a far stranger place when you start listening to the people brave enough to tell their stories. So, if you've experienced something unusual, something frightening, or something you simply can't explain, send it my way. Your story might find its way into a future episode of Project Black Garden, or as an official file. So please, share, like, and keep the emails coming. I can be reached at pbgharvest@gmail.com. or any of my socials, Instagram, TikTok, feel free to DM me there as well. I can be found at Gardner Michael. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep your eyes open to the mysteries hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes the monsters aren't in ancient journals. Sometimes they're standing at the edge of a cornfield. Sometimes they're tapping on your window. But most of all, they're hiding inside the stories people are afraid to tell. And remember, monsters are real. But sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster itself. It's discovering that someone else saw it too.